War had always followed a pattern the galaxy trusted. Worlds resisted, fleets advanced, resistance collapsed, and silence sealed the outcome. But when the Dominion Armada intercepted a fragmented transmission from a conquered human colony, that pattern fractured. The message arrived distorted by fire and atmospheric interference, repeating a single translated phrase with relentless clarity. They took the children. Inside the command chamber of the flagship, no alarm sounded, no weapons fired, yet something far more dangerous occurred. The alien general hesitated. Every strategist in the known systems understood that humans negotiated territory, resources, and survival margins when defeat became inevitable. But there existed a boundary no archive had fully explained, only hinted at through scattered reports of disproportionate retaliation and impossible endurance. The boundary had now been crossed, and the galaxy was about to learn why humanity rarely announces its limits. The Imperial command vessel maintained silent orbit above the ruined frontier world, its shadow stretching across broken continents and silent oceans. Initial conquest had proceeded with expected efficiency. Orbital defenses collapsed within minutes. Planetary coordination fractured within hours. By all measurable standards, the campaign had concluded successfully. Yet the surface now radiated anomalies that defied procedural closure. Electromagnetic disturbances pulsed across abandoned cities. Fragmented distress signals echoed from regions already catalogued as pacified. Energy signatures appeared and vanished without identifiable origin. None of these irregularities resembled resistance. They resembled aftermath without conclusion. General Carroll of the Dominion observed the planetary projection with disciplined stillness. His species had conquered systems for centuries, and deviation from predictive models rarely persisted beyond minor operational adjustments. Victory created order. Order produced silence. What now filled the data streams was not silence, but absence shaped into something intentional. A senior reconnaissance officer approached with measured composure, yet subtle physiological indicators revealed suppressed uncertainty. Surface surveys had identified a phenomenon not previously recorded in subjugated populations. Human non-combatant miners were missing in quantities inconsistent with evacuation or concealment. Tracking arrays indicated forced extraction during the final phase of planetary pacification by raider fleets operating outside Dominion authority. The chamber remained still after the report, not from protocol, but from recognition that conquest variables had shifted beyond doctrine. Carrel requested confirmation, his tone precise, controlled, devoid of visible reaction. The officer repeated the classification without alteration. Human offspring had been taken. The general accessed archived intelligence regarding human behavioral thresholds. Numerous analyses referenced anomalous escalation when offspring were threatened, but no empire had considered the phenomenon strategically decisive. Humanity's military capacity appeared finite, their strategic doctrine defensive, their technological footprint conventional. Nothing within predictive models suggested transformation, beyond calculable retaliation. Yet new data emerged even as the analysis concluded. Monitoring stations across multiple sectors reported synchronized alterations in human vessel trajectories. Civilian transports, research platforms, mining escorts, and obsolete defense craft had changed course simultaneously. No centralized command signal had been detected. No encrypted directive had been broadcast. Despite the absence of coordination, their vectors converged toward regions of unregulated space where the unauthorized raider fleets had last been recorded. The navigation lattice displayed the movement with stark clarity, decentralized assets, aligning with mathematical coherence without communication. Further reports followed in rapid succession. Industrial platforms across human territory initiated autonomous reconfiguration protocols, converting extraction frameworks into propulsion arrays and energy containment systems. Dormant infrastructure activated across trade corridors, long considered economically irrelevant. No declaration of war accompanied the transformation. No diplomatic transmission demanded restitution. The shift resembled not preparation for battle, but emergence of something long present, yet previously unnecessary. On the planet below, Dominion ground forces reported another deviation. Human survivors were not dispersing into wilderness regions nor assembling for resistance operations. Small groups positioned themselves within clear visual range of occupation units, displaying neither submission nor aggression. They transmitted no signals, issued no demands, and exhibited no measurable panic response. Physiological readings suggested controlled stress without collapse. Their behavior resembled observation conducted with deliberate patience. Carroll magnified one such group through orbital imaging. A human adult stood amid the remains of a collapsed habitation structure, posture steady, gaze directed upward toward the command vessel. No weapon was visible. No defensive gesture indicated fear. The figure's stillness communicated something beyond resignation. A composure anchored not in hope of survival, but in certainty that events already unfolding would proceed without need for intervention. Long-range monitoring outpost at the boundary of map space transmitted an urgent update. Sensors had detected a formation of human vessels assembling beyond standard navigation corridors, their propulsion signatures exceeding documented operational limits. They advanced without concealment, without encryption, without formation hierarchy recognizable to Dominion tactical frameworks. Their motion suggested inevitability rather than strategy. Within the command chamber, Carrel replayed the recovered transmission fragment, now clarified by enhanced translation algorithms. The phrase remained unchanged, stripped of distortion and context alike. They took the children. The general rose from his station with deliberate precision, an action that caused the chamber to quiet instinctively. He had presided over countless victories and had never altered strategic posture based on non-combatant variables. Yet accumulated data now indicated transformation beyond conventional warfare metrics. Humanity was not reorganizing for survival. It was aligning toward outcome. He issued a directive to Dominion High Command with controlled clarity. Engagement classification required revision. This was no longer a campaign of conquest governed by territory or resistance capacity. It had become a species-level response defined by a threshold no empire had successfully measured. As human vessels accelerated from distant systems and dormant networks awakened across the stars, the general understood that the conflict had entered a domain where victory and defeat no longer described consequences. Something irreversible had begun, and its momentum did not depend upon orders, strategy, or negotiation. The Dominion did not fear retaliation. It feared unpredictability, and unpredictability now defined every projection model. Across the strategic lattice, human activity expanded without central coordination, yet displayed perfect directional intent. Merchant convoys abandoned profitable routes. Research stations transmitted final data bursts before redirecting power to propulsion systems. Mining colonies ceased extraction and reconfigured mass drivers into launch platforms. The transformation was neither chaotic nor orderly in the military sense. It resembled a biological response, as if a dispersed organism had perceived injury and mobilized every cell toward restoration. General Carrel ordered expanded surveillance across human-adjacent sectors. But the data only deepened the anomaly. Human communications remained minimal, composed of brief, unencrypted acknowledgments of presence. No tactical plans circulated. No leadership hierarchy issued commands. Yet human vessels arrived at convergence points with precise timing, forming layered formations that did not match any known doctrine. Civilian hulls reinforced themselves with industrial plating. Agricultural transports integrated energy containment rings. Obsolete defense platforms extended propulsion arrays beyond design tolerance. Humanity was not assembling a fleet. It was redefining what constituted one. Dominion High Command responded to Carroll's advisory with cautious skepticism. Unauthorized raiders, they argued, did not represent a strategic actor capable of triggering interstellar escalation. The campaign should proceed. Occupation must stabilize. Human mobilization would dissipate once resistance futility became evident. Standard policy recommended targeted demonstrations of force to reinforce inevitability. Carrel acknowledged the directive, yet he did not implement it. Evidence indicated that demonstration would no longer produce submission. It would produce confirmation. Surface reports from the occupied world reinforced that conclusion. Dominion patrols encountered no organized resistance, but equipment failures increased without discernible cause. Energy weapons discharged without command, then stabilized. Navigation systems recalibrated spontaneously, correcting for variables that had not yet emerged. Environmental sensors registered subtle fluctuations in electromagnetic continuity across urban ruins, patterns that did not correspond to atmospheric disturbance. Human survivors remained visible, neither hiding nor approaching, their presence functioning less as defiance and more as witness. A field commander transmitted an observation, flagged for psychological review. A group of human adults had assembled within a devastated transit hub. They stood in silence while Dominion units secured the perimeter. One individual placed a small object upon the fractured floor, an item of no tactical significance. Yet after the placement, equipment anomalies ceased within the immediate vicinity. No signal emission was detected. No technological mechanism identified. The object remained inert. The commander requested clarification. None could be provided. Beyond the system. The unauthorized raider fleets altered course upon detecting human convergence vectors. Their movements suggested opportunistic withdrawal rather than confrontation. Yet the human vessels did not accelerate in pursuit. They maintained constant velocity, neither aggressive nor hesitant, preserving a trajectory that intersected not with the raiders' current position, but with the region those fleets would eventually occupy if retreat continued. It was not a chase. It was an interception defined by inevitability rather than speed. Carl analyzed predictive outcomes across expanding parameters. Traditional warfare evaluated strength, distance, supply capacity, and morale. The emerging human response introduced a variable absent from Dominion calculus: persistence independent of resource optimization. Humanity advanced not along efficient paths, but along certain ones. They did not adjust to minimize loss. They adjusted to ensure arrival. Within the command chamber, a junior analyst presented an unsettling synthesis. Human cultural archives, long dismissed as non-strategic, contained recurring references to a concept without precise Dominion equivalent. The closest translation rendered as obligation beyond negotiation. Historical records described human actions that defied survival logic when offspring were threatened. Entire populations had endured extreme deprivation without surrender. Military engagements continued despite catastrophic loss. Behavioral models indicated that when this threshold activated, humans ceased calculating acceptable outcomes. They pursued necessary ones. Carroll reviewed the compilation in silence. The data did not indicate anger. It indicated alignment between action and meaning that removed variance from response. Humanity had not declared war because declaration presupposed conditions for resolution. Their current trajectory presupposed none. A transmission from the frontier monitoring array confirmed that human convergence had entered unmapped space where navigation beacons did not exist. Instead of deploying probes to chart hazards, Human vessels generated localized reference fields derived from synchronized mass energy emissions. Each ship functioned as both traveler and coordinate, creating a moving framework through which others could navigate without prior mapping. They did not require safe passage. They manufactured it. Dominion High Command issued a second directive, this time advising preemptive engagement against human formations to prevent consolidation. Corel evaluated the proposal against updated projections. Engagement would not disperse the convergence. It would validate its premise. The general transmitted a measured response, recommending observation over intervention, framing the suggestion within resource conservation rationale. Approval was granted reluctantly, not from agreement, but from lack of precedent for alternative action. On the occupied planet, the human survivors' behavior shifted subtly. Their numbers did not increase, yet their distribution formed patterns that mirrored the convergence vectors of distant human vessels. They occupied positions corresponding to orbital trajectories, as though mapping an event not yet visible. Dominion sensors detected no communication between surface and fleet. Still, the alignment persisted with mathematical precision. Corel returned to the original transmission fragment once more. The phrase no longer appeared as distress. It functioned as declaration of condition. They took the children. Within Dominion doctrine, conquest altered territory and governance. Within human response, the same act had altered time itself. All subsequent events were no longer choices. They were consequences unfolding toward completion, far beyond the frontier. Human vessels entered the region where unauthorized raiders had once maneuvered freely. They did not deploy weapons. They did not broadcast demands. They established presence in silence, forming a structure defined not by formation geometry, but by relational positioning. Each vessel occupied a point that reduced variance across the network until movement itself became constrained by alignment. In the command chamber, Corel observed the emerging configuration and recognized the strategic impossibility it represented. Humanity was not attempting to overpower an adversary. It was redefining the environment in which opposition could occur. Where alignment persisted, deviation required energy beyond any raider fleet's capacity to sustain. The general understood then that the conflict had progressed beyond confrontation. It had entered resolution before engagement began. The unauthorized raider fleets discovered the shift before Dominion observers fully understood it. Their vessels attempted evasive maneuvers, accelerating toward unregulated corridors where pursuit had historically failed. Yet the human convergence did not pursue along expected vectors. Instead, it advanced through relational positioning, each vessel maintaining fixed proportional distance from the others, while gradually constricting navigational variance within the region. Space itself did not change, but movement through it became increasingly constrained. Raider captains found that every new trajectory led them closer to a boundary they could neither map nor breach. Dominion analysts initially interpreted the phenomenon as an emergent containment formation, but deeper modeling revealed no command architecture directing it. No flagship issued corrections. No signal synchronized orientation. Each human vessel adjusted only in response to local reference fields generated by its nearest neighbors. The network's coherence emerged from simple adherence to shared condition rather than imposed coordination. It resembled not a fleet, but a distributed structure that stabilized itself continuously. General Corel observed the data with measured focus, revising predictive frameworks in real time. Traditional conflict required concentration of force to compel surrender. Humanity had instead concentrated inevitability. By maintaining presence across sufficient relational nodes, they eliminated avenues of escape without direct confrontation. Dominion tactical doctrine contained no precedent for opposition to such a structure, because opposition presupposed a target. Here, no central vulnerability existed. Disruption at one node merely redistributed alignment across the remainder. Within the occupied human world, surface anomalies intensified with subtle precision. Dominion equipment no longer malfunctioned unpredictably. It recalibrated preemptively. Navigation arrays adjusted for atmospheric disturbances before they formed. Environmental controls stabilized temperature gradients without external input. These changes produced operational efficiency rather than degradation, yet their source remained unidentified. Human survivors continued their silent observation, their positions mirroring the expanding configuration in orbit and beyond. They neither communicated nor resisted, but their presence appeared to coincide with systemic stability rather than disorder. A Dominion scientific advisory proposed a hypothesis cautiously framed to avoid speculation. Human technological culture, long considered compartmentalized and reactive, might contain distributed adaptation protocols designed for catastrophic conditions. Such protocols would not activate during conventional conflict. They would emerge only when survival parameters extended beyond individual or planetary scale. The implication was not that humanity had planned for this specific event, but that it possessed mechanisms enabling coherent transformation when existential thresholds were crossed. Meanwhile, intercepted radar transmissions revealed escalating panic. Their navigational systems registered no physical barrier, yet every calculated escape route intersected with regions of increasing human presence. Attempts to accelerate through the network produced destabilizing energy feedback, not from weapon discharge, but from interference between propulsion fields and the relational lattice formed by the converging vessels. The raiders had not been surrounded by force. They had been enclosed by condition. Carrel requested expanded cultural analysis regarding human response to loss of offspring. Archived records described historical periods during which human societies mobilized resources beyond economic or military rationale to secure future continuity. These mobilizations did not conclude with victory or defeat. They concluded only when restoration occurred or capacity ceased. The concept of acceptable loss did not apply within this behavioral domain. Dominion strategists had previously classified such tendencies as inefficient. The present data suggested they were not inefficient. They were decisive. Dominion High Command transmitted a third directive, this time authorizing limited engagement to disrupt the emerging containment. Carrel examined the order without immediate implementation. Simulation indicated that weapon deployment against any segment of the human network would not produce dispersal. It would propagate adjustment across remaining nodes, tightening relational alignment and accelerating enclosure. Engagement would transform observation into confirmation of adversarial intent, thereby validating the trajectory humanity had already established. On the frontier of the convergence zone, a small Dominion reconnaissance vessel advanced cautiously to collect independent measurements. Its crew reported no hostility from human units, no targeting systems activated, no warnings transmitted. Yet the vessel's navigation controls gradually ceased responding to discretionary input. Thrusters functioned. Energy systems remained stable. Still, every attempted maneuver resolved into a vector consistent with the surrounding human lattice. The crew retained motion, but not direction. They existed within a framework where deviation required more energy than compliance. Carrel studied the report and recognized the strategic implication with clarity that required no interpretation. Humanity had not entered war in the conventional sense. It had established a domain where opposition could not achieve independent outcome. The general accessed the original human transmission once more, not as intelligence artifact, but as contextual key. The phrase no longer described an event. It described the condition from which all subsequent motion derived. Within the occupied world's orbit, Dominion ground commanders noted a final behavioral shift among human survivors. They began to gather in smaller numbers, forming circles that faced outward toward the horizon rather than inward toward one another. No ritual markers were present. No audible communication detected. Yet their arrangement corresponded precisely with predicted arrival vectors of distant human vessels as calculated through astronomical modeling. They appeared to be acknowledging an approach that instruments alone could not yet confirm. Far beyond mapped space, the human convergence completed its enclosure. Raider fleets, deprived of navigational variants, transmitted surrender signals without receiving response. Human vessels did not acknowledge capitulation. They maintained alignment, preserving condition rather than enforcing outcome. The raiders remained contained not by threat, but by absence of alternative. In the command chamber, General Carroll issued an update to Dominion High Command with deliberate neutrality. The campaign against humanity had entered a phase where victory and defeat no longer defined progress. The adversary had altered the environment of conflict itself, replacing contest with inevitability. Dominion doctrine contained procedures for overwhelming force, for strategic withdrawal, for negotiated resolution. It contained none for engagement within a system where outcome preceded action. As the report transmitted across imperial channels, Carrel recognized a conclusion forming not from speculation, but from observation repeated across scales. Humanity had not escalated its power. It had clarified its priority. Where that priority aligned, motion continued. Where it did not, motion ceased. The galaxy had mistaken human restraint for limitation. It had now encountered restraint's absence, and with it, a form of response that required neither command nor permission to proceed. Dominion High Command did not accept inevitability easily. Empires endure by believing every system can be measured, every adversary countered, every anomaly reduced to process. Yet the data arriving from the human convergence zone resisted reduction. Predictive engines failed not from insufficient information, but from surplus coherence. Every simulation that introduced force against the human lattice produced the same outcome. Containment intensified. Alignment stabilized, and the probability of Dominion influence within the region approached zero. The models did not forecast defeat. They forecast irrelevance. General Carrel remained at his command station as revised directives arrived in increasingly compressed intervals. Strategic authorities demanded explanation, then demanded intervention, then demanded confirmation that intervention would alter outcome. Each demand encountered the same constraint. Humanity had not presented a target. It had established a condition. Force applied against a condition could disrupt components, but disruption redistributed alignment rather than dissolving it. The more pressure simulations introduced, the more efficiently the human network absorbed variance and restored coherence. Beyond the frontier, the raider fleets attempted coordinated breakthrough maneuvers. Their vessels synchronized propulsion bursts, concentrating energy output at calculated weak points within the lattice. Observers recorded no weapons discharge from human ships. Instead, local reference fields adjusted proportionally to the raider's acceleration, redistributing relational spacing across the network. The breakthrough attempt did not fail through resistance. It dissolved through adjustment. Motion continued, but not in the direction intended. The raiders discovered that escape required a pathway no longer permitted by the geometry of alignment. Surrounding them, on the occupied human world, Dominion forces experienced an inversion of operational expectation. Infrastructure previously catalogued as destroyed began stabilizing without reconstruction. Atmospheric disturbances normalized. Power grids, though fragmented, achieved functional continuity across disconnected sectors. No identifiable repair activity occurred. Systems simply settled into equilibrium consistent with reduced but sustainable parameters. Human survivors remained visible, their silent presence coinciding with each stabilization event. Their behavior did not resemble resistance or collaboration. It resembled participation in a process that required neither instruction nor technology to enact. A Dominion behavioral specialist, reviewing extensive historical archives, identified a recurring pattern within human societies under extreme threat. When institutional structures failed, decentralized cooperation emerged spontaneously, guided not by hierarchy, but by shared recognition of necessary outcome. This cooperation did not require communication beyond minimal acknowledgement. Individuals acted according to internalized frameworks of responsibility shaped by cultural memory rather than immediate command. The specialist report concluded with cautious language. Humanity did not require centralized direction to align action with priority when that priority concerned continuation of the young. Carroll integrated the analysis with ongoing tactical observation. Across interstellar distances, human vessels exhibited the same principle. Each unit operated independently, yet all actions reduced variance within the network. No ship advanced for distinction. None withdrew for preservation. Their motion maintained relationship, and relationship produced structure. Dominion doctrine, built upon hierarchy and control, had never confronted an adversary whose coherence derived from absence of both. Dominion. High Command authorized a limited demonstration strike against an unoccupied sector of the lattice, selecting a region calculated to minimize escalation while testing structural resilience. A remote weapons platform discharged a contained energy pulse calibrated for disruption rather than destruction. Observers recorded the result with unprecedented clarity. The targeted region absorbed the disturbance through distributed adjustment, increasing alignment density across adjacent nodes. The lattice did not weaken. It refined. The demonstration had provided data, but not the data intended. Within the command chamber, silence followed the report's completion. Not the silence of uncertainty, but the recognition that available categories no longer described the situation. Carrel transmitted a revised advisory, stating that further demonstrations would function as participation in a process whose direction the Dominion did not define. He did not recommend withdrawal. Withdrawal implied departure from influence. Influence had already ceased. Surface patrols reported a final development that altered even Carrel's disciplined composure. Human survivors had begun marking locations across the devastated landscape with simple arrangements of material recovered from ruins. The arrangements bore no technological signature and transmitted no signal. Yet their placement corresponded precisely with orbital vectors of human vessels now approaching the system. Astronomical projections confirmed alignment beyond statistical coincidence. The survivors were not awaiting rescue. They were acknowledging arrival as a continuation of the same condition already present far beyond the frontier. The containment of the raider fleets concluded without battle. Their propulsion systems powered down one by one, not from external compulsion, but from exhaustion of navigational variance. With no direction remaining that did not return them to alignment, motion lost purpose. Human vessels maintained position, neither advancing nor withdrawing, preserving a configuration that rendered further action unnecessary. Resolution occurred without declaration. General Carrel reviewed the totality of evidence and recognized a transformation more profound than strategic reversal. Humanity had not escalated its capacity for violence. It had withdrawn the assumption that conflict required contest. Where priority aligned with continuation of its young, it replaced opposition with condition, variability with inevitability. Empires prevailed through control. Humanity, in this moment, prevailed through coherence that required none. As new data streams confirmed, human vessels entering Dominion-adjacent sectors without hostile posture. Carrel prepared a transmission to High Command, not as report of engagement, but as acknowledgement of threshold crossed. The campaign had not ended. It had been superseded by a response that did not recognize the campaign's premises. For the first time in recorded Dominion history, strategic language proved insufficient to describe what unfolded. Only observation remained, and within observation, an understanding difficult to deny. Some lines, once crossed, do not provoke war. They provoke outcome. Dominion High Command convened an emergency strategic assembly spanning multiple systems. Their deliberations transmitted through layered encryption to preserve authority in the face of mounting uncertainty. Empires survive by maintaining the belief that control persists even when comprehension falters. Yet the human response now unfolding resisted classification within every operational doctrine the Dominion possessed. Reports from frontier observation posts, orbital occupation forces, and deep space reconnaissance converged upon a single conclusion expressed in differing analytical language. Humanity had not escalated toward war. It advanced toward restoration, and every intervening structure that did not align with that objective was becoming irrelevant. General Carrel observed the Strategic Council's projections in silence, absorbing simulations that attempted to reduce the phenomenon to conventional conflict parameters. Each model failed at the same juncture. When human convergence reached sufficient density, predictive variance collapsed. Outcomes ceased branching. Trajectories resolved into singular progression independent of external interference. The Dominion had long measured power through capacity to compel change. Humanity now demonstrated capacity to render compulsion unnecessary. Across interstellar distances, human vessels began entering systems previously considered peripheral to Dominion expansion. They did not deploy weapons, transmit ultimatums, or disrupt infrastructure. Instead, they established relational positioning consistent with the lattice formed around the raider fleets. Local navigation conditions shifted subtly but measurably. Vessels of all species reported increased stability within affected regions, yet also diminished freedom to deviate from safe trajectories. Space itself had not altered. Risk had been redistributed until deviation required disproportionate expenditure of energy. Dominion commanders described the sensation with reluctant precision. Presence without pressure. On the occupied human world, ground forces encountered a transformation equally difficult to categorize. Human survivors initiated coordinated recovery of essential resources without communication, detectable by Dominion surveillance. Water distribution resumed across fragmented networks. Shelter structures emerged from repurposed debris, constructed with efficiency exceeding projections based on available labor. Medical stabilization occurred in improvised environments where no formal equipment existed. Each act appeared individually insignificant. Collectively, they restored continuity of life within a landscape officially classified as neutralized. Dominion authority remained visible, yet its functional necessity diminished. A senior Dominion sociologist presented an analysis that reframed previous intelligence assessments. Human societies, the report argued, exhibited dual operational modes. Under ordinary conditions, they displayed hierarchical organization, negotiation frameworks, and competitive resource allocation consistent with other sentient species. Under existential threat to offspring, however, those structures yielded to distributed responsibility guided by internalized imperatives rather than external command. In this mode, efficiency derived not from centralized planning but from universal participation aligned with a singular objective. The sociologist concluded with restrained terminology that nevertheless altered the chamber's atmosphere. Humanity functioned as a collective system when continuation of its young was endangered. Carrel integrated the sociological findings with tactical observation of the convergence zone. The containment of the raider fleets persisted without deterioration. No human vessel exhibited signs of resource depletion despite extended operational duration. Energy signatures fluctuated within sustainable parameters, suggesting adaptive management rather than consumption. Attempts by Dominion reconnaissance to introduce perturbations into the lattice produced only localized adjustments that preserved overall coherence. The structure did not resist interference. It incorporated it. Dominion High Command issued a revised directive, acknowledging the limits of force application within the convergence region. Diplomatic overtures were authorized toward human representatives, though no centralized authority could be identified to receive them. Standard channels transmitted inquiries regarding cessation of hostilities, restoration of territorial boundaries, and conditions for de-escalation. Human vessels did not respond. They did not refuse. They continued alignment. A transmission from a peripheral Dominion colony introduced an unexpected variable. The colony, established decades prior near human trade corridors, reported spontaneous stabilization of long-standing environmental instabilities coinciding with the arrival of a small human formation in adjacent space. Atmospheric fluctuations normalized. Seismic activity diminished. Agricultural output increased without intervention. The human vessels neither entered orbit nor communicated intent. They maintained distant alignment, their presence correlating with improved systemic equilibrium. The colony governor requested clarification regarding whether such activity constituted occupation. No definition within Dominion doctrine applied. Within the command chamber, Corral considered the accumulating evidence with disciplined introspection. Humanity's response did not conform to conquest, retaliation, or negotiation. It operated according to a principle that rendered those categories secondary. Where the young had been taken, humanity moved to restore condition under which such taking could not occur again. Restoration did not target adversaries. It targeted possibility. Surface patrols on the occupied world reported a final development that altered Dominion perception at its foundation. Human survivors had begun constructing modest structures at locations corresponding precisely to the positions of distant human vessels within the convergence network. The structures contained no technology and emitted no signal. They functioned as physical acknowledgments of relational alignment across astronomical distance. Dominion analysts recognized the implication with reluctant clarity. Humanity did not require communication to maintain coherence. It required only shared recognition of what must continue far beyond mapped space. The Raider fleets initiated formal surrender transmissions addressed to all known authorities, including the Dominion and any human recipients. No response arrived from human vessels. The lattice persisted unchanged. Within that persistence lay a message more definitive than acknowledgement. Resolution did not depend upon capitulation. It depended upon restoration of the condition whose violation had initiated the response. General Carroll prepared a transmission to Dominion High Command, framed not as tactical update, but as conceptual revision. The campaign against humanity had revealed a limitation within imperial strategy itself. Empires governed through control of territory, resources, and opposition. Humanity, when confronted with threat to its young, governed through coherence of purpose that rendered control unnecessary. Where coherence prevailed, opposition dissolved not through defeat, but through absence of relevance. As the transmission departed the flagship, Carroll observed the occupied world below, no longer silent in the manner of subjugated territory, but quiet in the manner of continuity restored through distributed action. Across the stars, human vessels maintained alignment, not advancing toward conquest, but establishing conditions under which continuation required no permission. The general understood then that the Dominion faced not an adversary seeking victory, but a species enacting necessity. And necessity, once recognized, did not negotiate. Dominion High Command received General Carroll's conceptual revision with measured restraint. Yet beneath formal acknowledgement, spread an awareness that the conflict had entered territory beyond imperial precedent. Empires defined power through the ability to impose outcome. Humanity now demonstrated a capacity that required no imposition at all. Where human alignment emerged, conditions shifted until opposition ceased to function as an independent variable. Dominion analysts attempted to quantify the phenomena, but their models repeatedly encountered the same limitation. Humanity was not exerting force outward. It was reorganizing context itself. Across interstellar sectors, reports accumulated of subtle environmental stabilization coinciding with human presence. Systems long plagued by navigational hazards experienced reduced variance in gravitational anomalies. Trade routes previously considered volatile became reliably traversable. These changes did not benefit humanity exclusively. They benefited all who existed within the region. Yet Dominion observers recognized the underlying principle with growing clarity. Stability emerged not as a gesture of cooperation, but as a byproduct of alignment. Where humanity acted to ensure continuation of its young, it eliminated conditions under which arbitrary disruption could persist. Within the convergence zone, the unauthorized raider fleets remained suspended within a framework that allowed existence but denied consequence. Their vessels retained energy reserves, operational systems, and communication capacity. They possessed the means to act, yet no action altered their position relative to the lattice. Attempts to disperse resulted in reabsorption into alignment. Appeals for negotiation transmitted across open channels received no acknowledgement, not from refusal, but from irrelevance. The raiders had ceased to function as agents. They had become variables without effect. General Corral continued observation with disciplined precision, his attention drawn not to spectacle, but to pattern. Human vessels displayed no acceleration beyond what relational positioning required. They did not advance toward Dominion territory with hostile intent. Instead, their presence expanded gradually, establishing zones of stabilized navigation that overlapped with previously contested regions. Conflict did not diminish through treaty or victory. It diminished through absence of variance sufficient to sustain it. On the occupied human world, Dominion ground forces reported a transformation that redefined the meaning of occupation. Human survivors no longer appeared as remnants of defeated resistance. They functioned as participants within a distributed restoration process extending beyond the planet itself. Resource networks achieved continuity without centralized management. Medical stabilization reduced mortality rates below projections despite limited technology. Environmental balance emerged where devastation had rendered equilibrium improbable. Dominion authority remained formally intact. Yet operational necessity for that authority diminished with each passing cycle. Dominion cultural analysts delivered a synthesis that challenged foundational assumptions of imperial governance. Human societies, the analysis concluded, did not treat offspring merely as continuation of lineage. They treated them as continuation of possibility. Threat to that possibility activated behavioral frameworks not oriented toward victory, but toward preservation of conditions within which future could exist. When those frameworks activated collectively, humanity ceased to operate as a collection of individuals. It functioned as a coherent process distributed across scale. Corral considered the implication with uncharacteristic introspection. Dominion conquest had always assumed that subjugated populations would respond within predictable limits of fear and survival. Humanity had demonstrated that beyond those limits lay not chaos, but alignment. The general accessed the original transmission fragment once more, not as intelligence artifact, but as origin point of a transformation now spanning systems. The phrase they took to children no longer described loss alone. It described activation. A transmission arrived from a remote dominion, outpost positioned near the expanding perimeter of human presence. The outpost reported no threat, no demand, no interference. Instead, it documented a gradual reduction in resource volatility, enabling sustained operation without reinforcement for the first time in decades. The commanding officer requested guidance regarding whether to classify the change as occupation, alliance, or anomaly. No existing designation proved adequate. Within the convergence zone, a final development altered the structure of observation itself. Human vessels initiated a gradual dispersal, not away from alignment, but through it, redistributing presence across sectors previously beyond Dominion influence. The lattice did not dissolve. It extended. Regions once defined by contest became defined by continuity. The raider fleets remained contained, not as prisoners, but as residual variables within a system no longer responsive to their motion. General Corral prepared his next transmission to High Command with deliberate clarity. The campaign against humanity had reached functional completion without formal conclusion. Dominion objectives concerning territorial acquisition no longer corresponded to operational reality. Humanity had not sought to expel the Dominion. It had rendered the premise of conquest obsolete within regions where alignment prevailed. The General's report articulated the outcome without embellishment. The Dominion faced not an enemy advancing toward Dominion, but a process establishing conditions under which domination had no function. As the transmission departed the flagship, Corral observed the occupied world below, its atmosphere stabilizing, its population recovering continuity through distributed action. Across the stars, human vessels maintained presence without proclamation. The General recognized a final implication emerging from the totality of evidence. Humanity had not responded to loss with retaliation. It had responded with restoration so comprehensive that the cause of loss could not recur. Beyond the frontier, Dominion High Command struggled to frame reports into actionable strategy. Every projection reinforced the same uncomfortable truth. Human activity had transcended conflict. It had redefined the space in which conflict could occur. Human fleets moved with a rhythm that required no orders, no communication, no central coordination. Each vessel's presence stabilized the surrounding region, eliminated navigational hazards, and constrained raider movement without a single shot fired. Dominion observers began referring to the human advance not as maneuvering, but as inevitable alignment, a term previously absent from operational vocabulary. Surface forces on the occupied planet witnessed phenomena that defied explanation. Machinery repaired itself, energy grids redistributed power, and environmental systems stabilized spontaneously. Dominion units maintained standard protocols, yet each patrol recorded inexplicable precision in restored structures. Human survivors continued their silent observation, their behavior purposeful yet understated, marking ruins in ways that corresponded to orbital vectors of approaching human vessels. The synchronization of activity across planetary and interstellar scales suggested comprehension beyond any single mind, an understanding of outcome embedded in motion rather than transmitted through command. Raider fleets attempted renewed escape, deploying high-velocity maneuvers toward sectors considered outside human reach. Yet the relational lattice established by human vessels preemptively intercepted them. Propulsion systems were forced to recalibrate continuously to maintain trajectory, consuming energy with every attempt. No weapons fired, no signals sent, yet deviation became impossible. Raiders discovered that existence within the lattice allowed life but denied autonomy. Any action outside alignment returned them to a vector determined not by opposition, but by inevitability. Carroll reviewed communications from multiple sectors and noted behavioral uniformity. Human presence had created zones where Dominion authority remained nominal but irrelevant. Where they moved, conditions themselves conformed to necessity. Engagement no longer produced result. Observation produced consequence. The campaign had shifted from contest to inevitability, a transformation imperceptible to those unaccustomed to viewing conflict as environmental rather than combative. Reports of human conduct on the occupied world illustrated the same principle. Survivors now arranged themselves in clusters corresponding to vectors of distant vessels, their positioning reinforcing coherence across the system. No audible signals, no technological augmentation, only human presence and alignment with the broader framework. Equipment anomalies, environmental disturbances, and logistical failures stabilized once their patterns aligned with human positioning. Dominion analysts described the phenomenon as a propagation of influence without force. REL synthesized cultural and tactical analysis with observable data. Human historical records documented recurrent behaviors, societies reacting to threats against their young with mobilization beyond conventional logic, distributed responsibility over centralized command, and pursuit of outcomes irrespective of calculated cost. The historical precedent explained current behavior not as anomaly, but as pattern. Humanity did not require centralized strategy because alignment and necessity operated as guiding principles. Any measure of coercion introduced into the system strengthened, rather than weakened, the lattice. High Command considered further engagement, debating whether a demonstration of power could disrupt human coordination. Carrel evaluated the projected models and found them counterproductive. Deployment of weapons would not fracture the human alignment. It would reinforce it, redistributing coherence across nodes and accelerating containment of the raider fleets. Action, once intended to assert dominance, would serve only to confirm human inevitability. He transmitted this assessment with deliberate neutrality, framing it in terms of resource conservation and operational efficiency. Approval followed reluctantly, a concession to incapacity rather than agreement. Beyond observation, human vessels began extending their relational lattice to sectors previously considered peripheral. Dominion-controlled regions now fell within a zone of stabilization, where deviation became costly and unpredictability impossible. Presence alone achieved what conquest could not: restoration of conditions favorable to human priority. The raider fleets, still functional but contained, became immaterial. They had surrendered not through coercion, but by entering a system where their choices had been neutralized. On the occupied planet, human survivors completed subtle adjustments that aligned with incoming fleets. Structures erected from ruins formed reference points invisible to Dominion systems, but integral to relational positioning. Energy grids, transportation conduits, and environmental systems continued autonomous stabilization. Human action had moved beyond mere survival. It had become the mechanism of order within a system previously defined by disorder. Rel documented the phenomenon in his next report, noting that the human response was no longer comprehensible within conventional tactical terms. They had not retaliated, conquered, or negotiated. They had enacted inevitability. Where the children were threatened, humanity acted not with aggression, but with coherence, a force indifferent to conflict yet unassailable in effect. The campaign's parameters had been superseded. Action was no longer required. Only recognition. The stage was set for the final realization. Dominion authority could exist formally, yet functionally it had been superseded. Humanity had not fought the Dominion to victory. It had acted to restore condition, to remove variance, and to neutralize opposition by necessity. Every action observed, every alignment achieved, pointed toward a conclusion that was both inevitable and irreversible. The galaxy held its breath as human vessels continued their quiet expansion, not as invaders, but as stabilizers of inevitable consequence. Dominion High Command no longer issued direct orders. All projections had become redundant. Every action they could attempt only reinforced the human lattice. Across sectors, observational satellites recorded adjustments so subtle that an untrained eye would miss them. Yet each motion corrected anomalies, absorbed navigational hazards, and realigned fleets without a single weapon fired. Humanity's response was no longer a campaign. It was a condition imposed on reality itself, an inevitability that could neither be resisted nor altered. On the occupied human world, survivors moved with purpose that defied conventional analysis. Groups arranged themselves in geometries corresponding to orbital vectors of approaching vessels. Materials were repurposed into structures that lacked technological sophistication yet exerted influence on the relational lattice extending into orbit. Energy systems, communication arrays, and environmental controls stabilized autonomously. Dominion patrols observed these changes, unable to explain them or interfere without unintentionally reinforcing them. The human presence had become a natural law, a network of cause and effect that required neither leadership nor command. Raider fleets, still operational but constrained, began to transmit surrender signals not to human vessels, but to any entity capable of receiving them. No acknowledgement arrived. Their surrender was irrelevant. Alignment, not response, dictated consequence. Every attempted maneuver to escape human containment redistributed positional energy across the lattice, strengthening its coherence. The more they resisted, the more they were contained. Dominion analysts struggled to frame this in language comprehensible to commanders accustomed to conventional victory. Humanity had not acted to subdue. It had acted to make subduing unnecessary. General Carroll studied data streaming from multiple observation points, noting the uniformity and consistency of human adaptation. It extended beyond ships and personnel into environmental influence. Unstable weather systems normalized, energy grids balanced, and ecological disruptions corrected themselves in zones corresponding to human presence. No formal interaction occurred. It was as though the human condition radiated purpose through space itself, and all systems within that influence adjusted naturally, without conscious intervention. Cultural analysts submitted historical context for this phenomenon. Humanity had repeatedly demonstrated, in crises threatening their young, an instinctive ability to restore stability across both population and environment. Central authority proved unnecessary. Decentralized action achieved coherence automatically. Past conflicts, whether local or global, showed similar patterns. What had once been isolated behavioral anomalies now manifested across interstellar scales, confirming that human alignment was not reactive but generative. Dominion strategists began to redefine their understanding of influence. Carroll issued a formal report to High Command. No engagement orders were necessary. All human actions had rendered the campaign's objectives obsolete. Containment, surrender, victory. These concepts no longer applied. Human alignment was not a force to be opposed. It was a framework in which all opposition ceased to function as an independent variable. The report concluded with a single observation. The humans acted not out of desire for conquest, but out of necessity for continuation. The universe adjusted to them, rather than the reverse dot in the convergence zone. Human vessels maintained orbit and trajectory with a precision that seemed effortless. Raider ships, Dominion fleets, and peripheral systems were all constrained within a web of inevitability. No commands, no interventions, no threats could alter the lattice's alignment. Humanity's response had transformed space itself into a medium of control, where outcomes were pre-established by presence and priority, not by force. Dominion forces found themselves operating in a system where their decisions were consequential only insofar as they remained compliant with the pattern humanity had established. The occupied planet, once a point of conflict, now mirrored this reality. Human survivors continued subtle acts of restoration, clearing debris, arranging markers, repairing environmental systems. Their actions were neither coordinated through communication nor visible hierarchy. Yet each move contributed to the stabilization of larger patterns extending into orbit. Dominion authority remained present, yet irrelevant. Humanity had acted to restore conditions rather than defeat, to impose inevitability rather than victory. General Carroll reflected on the scale of what had occurred. The human response had transcended conventional understanding of warfare, diplomacy, and strategy. They had not sought to overpower, negotiate, or conquer. They had acted to ensure that the conditions under which loss could occur were neutralized. The raider fleets, Dominion forces, and even environmental chaos now existed within a system defined by human coherence. The galaxy had witnessed not a battle, but the imposition of inevitability itself. The galaxy watched in silent awe as human vessels continued their calm, deliberate expansion. Not with aggression, not with demands, but with the simple presence of inevitability. Every system touched by humanity shifted subtly, yet irrevocably, as if the universe itself bent to accommodate their priorities. Dominion fleets, raiders, and observation platforms alike discovered that action outside the human-aligned lattice no longer produced consequence. Attempts to resist, to escape, or to dominate merely reinforced the coherence humanity had established. They had not defeated their enemies. They had rendered opposition irrelevant. On the occupied planet, human survivors completed the last stage of their silent restoration. Every structure, every patch of cleared land, every environmental adjustment synchronized with the vectors of human vessels above and across the stars. Dominion forces observed without comprehension. They possessed authority in name, yet functionally it had no meaning. Human priority had imposed itself across scales, from the debris-strewn streets to the orbital networks, and even the raider fleets constrained by alignment felt the inescapable order of human purpose. Nothing moved without integration into the lattice. Nothing acted without eventual consequence. General Carroll transmitted his final report to High Command, acknowledging what no prior doctrine could define. Humanity had not merely acted. They had transcended the need for action. Where loss once provoked retaliation, they responded with restoration. Where threat existed, they responded with alignment. The Dominion could observe, analyze, and record, but no command, no strategy, no weapon could alter the conditions humanity had created. Victory and defeat were irrelevant within this system. As the humans had imposed a condition upon reality itself, the raider fleets, fully contained without confrontation, powered down systems, recognizing the futility of motion outside human alignment. Their surrender was not requested. It was assumed, enforced by consequence, by geometry, by inevitability. Human vessels maintained positions that did not require combat, but established the framework under which the galaxy itself stabilized. Dominion observers could do nothing but watch. All projections, all predictions, all notions of influence had collapsed under the singular force of human coherence in the final hours. Human survivors on the planet continued their subtle acts of restoration, unhurried and deliberate. Markers were placed, energy flows balanced, and environmental stabilization completed. Their work was silent, uncelebrated, and yet its effect extended beyond sight, beyond technology, beyond even the Dominion's understanding. The lattice expanded, consolidating coherence across space and systems, erasing variance, and ensuring that the only future permitted was one in which humanity's young. Their continuity and their priorities remained unthreatened. General Carroll watched and finally understood. Humanity had not fought to win. They had acted to ensure that opposition could no longer matter. The campaign concluded not with victory, not with defeat, not with surrender, but with realization. Some forces operate not through domination, but through inevitability. Humanity had imposed such a force. The galaxy would never again encounter them as mere opponents, for they had transcended the very conditions that allow opposition to exist. As the human fleets and planetary survivors stabilized the system, Carrel composed the final note of his report. Humanity does not fight to win. It acts to ensure impossibility of loss. Observed patterns confirm that some lines, once crossed, do not provoke war. They impose consequence. They establish inevitability. With this final observation, the story reaches its conclusion. The human's actions, both subtle and profound, have rewritten the rules of engagement and existence itself, leaving the Dominion, the Raiders, and the galaxy at large in awe of a species whose priority for continuation of life had become a universal law.